Tell us in the comments which city you are listening from. Click the like button and let's begin the story. Gabriel was 9 years old when Director Morales sold him to the Montero family for 3,000 pesos, and a signed document that looked official but meant nothing. The transaction happened on a Thursday afternoon in the administrative office of the São Rafael orphanage, a crumbling building on the outskirts of São Paulo where 43 children lived in conditions that would make any decent person weep. Gabriel had been there for 2 years, ever since his parents died in a factory fire that also took 11 other workers, and made headlines for exactly 3 days before the city moved on and forgot. He had no extended family, no one who asked about him, no photographs except one blurry image of his mother holding him as a baby, which he kept hidden under his mattress. Director Morales called him into the office that Thursday with a smile that never reached his eyes. "Gabriel, today is a very special day for you," he said, gesturing toward a well-dressed couple sitting across from his desk. "Mr. and Mrs. Montero have decided to give you a home, a real family. You're a very lucky boy." Mr. Montero was a tall man in his 50s, with gray hair slicked back with too much gel and small dark eyes that studied Gabriel the way someone might examine livestock at a market. His wife was younger, maybe 40, with blonde hair tied in a tight bun and a mouth that seemed incapable of smiling. "Stand up straight," Mr. Montero said. It was the first thing he ever said to Gabriel. Not hello, not welcome to the family, just a command. Gabriel straightened his back. Mrs. Montero walked around him slowly, examining him from different angles. "He's thin," she said to her husband, as if Gabriel couldn't hear. "Will he be strong enough?" "He'll gain weight with proper work," Mr. Montero replied. "The ad said he's obedient and used to manual labor." Gabriel's stomach tightened. Something about the way they spoke felt wrong, but he had learned in 2 years at the orphanage not to ask questions that adults didn't want to answer. Director Morales handed Mr. Montero a folder of documents. "Everything is in order," he said. "Birth certificate, medical records, and the signed consent forms. As far as the law is concerned, Gabriel is now part of your family." Money changed hands. Gabriel saw the bills, crisp and new, counted carefully before being tucked into Director Morales' desk drawer. "Get your things," the director said to Gabriel. "You're leaving today." Gabriel had almost nothing to pack. 2 changes of clothes, the photograph of his mother, a small wooden car his father had carved for him when he was 5. Everything fit into a plastic bag that had once held rice. None of the other children said goodbye. They had learned not to get attached. Children came and went from São Rafael, and it was better not to wonder where they ended up. The drive to the Montero property took 4 hours through increasingly remote roads that climbed into the mountains. Gabriel sat in the back seat watching the city disappear, replaced by forests of pine and eucalyptus, then barren hills dotted with rocks and low scrub. Mr. Montero drove in silence. Mrs. Montero stared out the window. Neither of them spoke to Gabriel or to each other. By the time they reached the property, the sun was setting behind the mountains, casting long shadows across a landscape that looked like the end of the world. The Montero house was a large structure of gray stone and dark wood, isolated on a plateau surrounded by steep slopes. There were no neighbors, no other buildings visible in any direction. Just the house, a barn, and miles of empty land. "Welcome home," Mr. Montero said, and the word home sounded like a threat. Inside, the house was cold and smelled of damp stone and old wood. The furniture was expensive but joyless, dark leather couches, heavy wooden tables, walls bare except for a few religious paintings that depicted suffering saints. Mrs. Montero led Gabriel through a hallway to a small room at the back of the house. It had a narrow bed, a wooden dresser, and a single small window that looked out onto the barn. "This is where you'll sleep," she said. "Dinner is at 6. You're expected to be clean and on time. Tomorrow your work begins." She left before Gabriel could ask what kind of work. That first dinner was silent and uncomfortable. Gabriel sat at the kitchen table while Mr. and Mrs. Montero ate slowly, methodically, without speaking. The food was simple: bread, cheese, cold meat, but more than he usually got at the orphanage. "Tomorrow you wake at 5. Mr. Montero said when the meal ended. "My wife will show you your duties." Gabriel nodded, not trusting his voice. That night he lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the wind howl around the house, and feeling more alone than he had ever felt in his life. At the orphanage, there had at least been other children. Here, there was nothing but silence, and the distant sound of something, maybe an animal, crying in the darkness outside. The next morning, Mrs. Montero woke him before dawn by yanking the blanket off his bed. "Get dressed," she said. "You have work to do." The work began immediately and never seemed to end. Gabriel was given a list of tasks that would have been overwhelming for an adult, let alone a 9-year-old child. He was to clean the entire house every day, scrubbing floors on his hands and knees, washing windows, dusting furniture. He was to tend the animals in the barn, feeding chickens, collecting eggs, mucking out stalls. He was to carry water from the well, chop firewood, wash clothes by hand in a metal tub. The Monteros watched him work with cold, critical eyes, pointing out every mistake, every moment of slowness. "Faster," Mrs. Montero would say when he scrubbed the kitchen floor. "A lazy child is a worthless child." If he paused to rest, Mr. Montero would appear with a leather belt in his hand. "In this house, we don't tolerate laziness," he would say, and the belt would crack against the wall as a warning. Gabriel learned quickly that the adoption had been a lie. He was not a son. He was unpaid labor, a slave in everything but name. He ate only after the Monteros finished their meals, and only whatever scraps remained. He slept in the cold room at the back of the house, and woke before dawn every morning to begin the same endless cycle of work. On the third night, something happened that made Gabriel realize he had to escape or die trying. He had been carrying buckets of water from the well to the house, a journey he had already made 8 times that evening, when his exhausted arms gave out and one of the buckets slipped from his grip, spilling water across the kitchen floor. Mrs. Montero's face twisted with rage. "You clumsy, worthless boy," she hissed, grabbing his arm so hard he cried out. "Do you know how much water you just wasted?" She dragged him to where Mr. Montero sat reading a newspaper. "He spilled an entire bucket," she said. Mr. Montero stood slowly, removing his belt. "I warned you about carelessness," he said. The beating that followed was brutal and methodical. Mr. Montero struck Gabriel's back, his legs, his arms, while Mrs. Montero watched with her arms crossed. When Gabriel fell to the floor, curling into a ball to protect himself, the blows continued. "You will learn," Mr. Montero said between strikes, "that in this house, mistakes have consequences." When it finally stopped, Gabriel could barely move. His body was covered in welts and bruises, and every breath sent sharp pain through his ribs. "Clean up this water," Mrs. Montero said, "and then go to your room. No dinner tonight." Gabriel cleaned the floor on his hands and knees, tears streaming silently down his face, and then crawled to his room, where he collapsed onto the bed. As he lay there in the darkness, listening to the Monteros laugh at something on the television in the other room, Gabriel made a decision. He was going to run. He didn't know where he would go or how he would survive, but he knew with absolute certainty that staying in this house would eventually kill him. He waited until past midnight, until the house fell completely silent. Then he carefully packed his few belongings into the plastic bag, the photograph of his mother, the wooden car, an extra shirt, and silently opened his bedroom window. The cold night air hit him like a physical blow, but he didn't hesitate. He climbed through the window, dropped to the ground, and began running toward the dark mountains that rose behind the property. He didn't look back. Behind him, the Montero house sat like a tombstone against the night sky. Ahead of him was only darkness, freezing cold, and the unknown. But anything was better than staying. The first hour of Gabriel's escape was pure terror and adrenaline. He ran blindly through the darkness, stumbling over rocks and low bushes, his breath coming in ragged gasps that formed clouds in the freezing air. The temperature had dropped dramatically after sunset, and he was wearing only thin clothes and worn sneakers that were already falling apart. His body screamed with pain from the beating. Every step sent sharp jolts through his bruised ribs. But fear pushed him forward. He knew that when the Monteros discovered he was gone, probably at dawn when Mrs. Montero came to wake him for work, they would come looking. And if they found him, the punishment would be far worse than anything he had endured so far. So he ran deeper into the mountains, following animal trails that were barely visible in the darkness, using the distant lights of the Montero house as a reference point to make sure he was moving away from it. After what felt like hours, exhaustion finally overtook him. He collapsed behind a large boulder, his lungs burning, his legs trembling so violently he couldn't stand. He was lost, completely and utterly lost. He had no food, no water, no idea where he was or which direction led to safety. Above him, the sky was thick with clouds that blocked out the moon and stars. Around him, the forest was alive with sounds. Wind through branches, the cry of night birds, distant animal howls that might have been dogs or something worse. Gabriel curled into a ball behind the boulder, trying to preserve what little warmth remained in his body, and for the first time since his parents died, he let himself cry. Not quiet tears. Full, broken sobs that shook his entire body. He cried for his parents, who would never know what had happened to him. He cried for the childhood that had been stolen. He cried for the innocence he had lost in just 3 days at the Montero house. But eventually, the tears stopped. Not because the pain went away, but because his body simply had nothing left. He fell into an exhausted sleep, still curled behind the boulder, as the temperature continued to drop toward freezing. He woke to the sound of voices. Dawn had broken, though the sky was still gray and overcast. Gabriel's body was so cold he could barely move his fingers, and his lips had turned blue. But the voices jolted him fully awake. They were distant but clear, echoing through the mountain valleys. "Gabriel, we know you're out here." It was Mr. Montero's voice, amplified somehow, probably through a megaphone. "Come back now, and we'll forget this happened. Stay hidden, and you'll freeze to death in these mountains. No one survives out here alone." Gabriel pressed himself flatter against the boulder, his heart pounding so hard he was sure they would hear it. Then Mrs. Montero's voice joined her husband's, sharp and angry. "You ungrateful child. After everything we've done for you. When we find you, you'll learn what real punishment means." The voices seemed to come from multiple directions, echoing off the rocky slopes. Gabriel couldn't tell how close they were or which direction they were searching. He forced his frozen body to move, crawling on hands and knees away from the voices, staying low to avoid being seen against the skyline. The terrain grew steeper and rockier. At one point he had to slide down a scree slope, scraping his hands raw on the sharp stones. At another, he squeezed through a gap between 2 massive boulders that tore his shirt. The voices continued behind him, sometimes closer, sometimes farther away. Hours passed. The gray morning turned into a gray afternoon. Light rain began to fall, soaking through Gabriel's thin clothes and making his already hypothermic body shake uncontrollably. He was going to die out here. He knew it with certainty now. He was going to freeze or starve or simply collapse and never get up again. But he kept moving, because the alternative, being found by the Monteros, was worse than death. It was late afternoon, as the light began to fade again, when Gabriel stumbled onto something impossible. He had been following what looked like an old trail, probably used by hunters or hikers decades ago, when he noticed something unnatural among the rocks and vegetation ahead. A corner of rusted metal. He approached cautiously, pulling aside branches and frozen weeds. What he uncovered made him stop breathing. It was a door. A heavy metal door set into the hillside, almost completely hidden by decades of accumulated dirt, dead leaves, and overgrown plants. The door was covered in rust and corrosion, but it was still solid. It had a large handle, also rusted, and what looked like it had once been a locking mechanism, though that had long since degraded. Gabriel stared at it for a long moment, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. Why was there a door buried in the mountainside? Where did it lead? Who had built it? He grabbed the handle with both hands and pulled. Nothing happened. He tried again, using all his remaining strength, his feet bracing against the rocks. The door groaned, a deep metallic sound that seemed to come from the earth itself, and then slowly, incredibly, it began to move. Dirt and debris rained down as the door swung outward on hinges that screamed with rust, but somehow still functioned. Cold air rushed out from the opening, carrying a smell of damp earth and old stone. Beyond the door was darkness. Complete, absolute darkness that seemed to swallow light. Gabriel stood at the threshold, shivering so violently he could barely stand, listening to the distant voices of the Monteros still searching the mountains. He had two choices: stay outside and almost certainly die from exposure or be recaptured, or enter this unknown darkness and discover what waited inside. He chose the darkness. Gabriel stepped through the doorway and immediately felt the temperature change. It was still cold, but different, the kind of cold that comes from being underground, rather than the biting wind cold of the mountain. He turned to pull the door close behind him, sealing out the last gray light of day. The darkness became total. For several long seconds, Gabriel stood frozen, his hand still on the inside of the door, unable to see anything at all. Then his eyes began to adjust, or rather, he began to notice that it wasn't completely dark after all. Somewhere ahead, deeper in whatever this place was, there was the faintest glow of light. He moved toward it slowly, one hand trailing along the wall to keep his balance. The wall was smooth stone, not natural cave rock, but deliberately cut and shaped. This was not a natural formation. Someone had built this. The corridor sloped gently downward. Gabriel counted his steps, 20, 30, 40, before the space opened up into a larger chamber. The light was coming from above, filtering down through what looked like ventilation shafts, cleverly hidden among the rocks on the surface. It was dim, but after the complete darkness, it felt almost bright. And in that gray light, Gabriel saw something that made him stop completely. He was standing in an underground shelter. It was a single large room, maybe 20 feet across, with a curved ceiling supported by metal beams. Along the walls were shelves made of wood and metal, most of them still holding supplies, cans of food, bottles of water, folded blankets. In one corner was a small wood stove with a metal chimney that presumably led to one of the ventilation shafts. In another corner was a cot with a mattress that looked old but still intact. There was a wooden table with two chairs, a bookshelf filled with water-damaged but readable books, a metal cabinet with its doors hanging open. But most striking of all was how deliberately organized everything was. This wasn't an abandoned place that had slowly fallen into chaos. Someone had maintained it, cared for it, left it ready for exactly this purpose, to shelter someone in desperate need. Gabriel moved deeper into the room, his wet clothes dripping onto the stone floor. His hands were shaking from cold, from exhaustion, from shock. He found dry clothes folded on one of the shelves, simple pants and shirts in various sizes, as if whoever had stocked this place had anticipated that people of different ages might need them. He stripped off his soaked clothing and put on dry pants and a thick wool sweater that was too large but gloriously warm. On the shelf with the clothes, he found a handwritten note. "If you are reading this, you are safe. Take what you need. Rest. You are not alone." The words were simple, but they hit Gabriel like a physical blow. He sank to the floor, his back against the wall, and for the second time in 24 hours, he began to cry. But this time, the tears were different. They were tears of relief, of overwhelming, impossible relief. He was safe. At least for now, he was safe. Gabriel sat on the floor of the buried shelter for a long time, just breathing, just existing, letting his traumatized body begin to understand that the immediate danger had passed. Eventually, he forced himself to stand and explore more carefully. The food on the shelves was surprisingly fresh: canned beans, rice, dried fruit, crackers in airtight containers. Whoever maintained this place had restocked it recently. He found a manual can opener and opened a can of beans, eating them cold with his fingers. They were the best thing he had tasted in days. There was water too, large plastic bottles that were still sealed. He drank until his stomach hurt. As his immediate physical needs were met, his mind began to work again, asking the questions he had been too desperate to ask before. Who built this place? Why? And how recently had someone been here? He began searching the shelter more systematically. The books on the shelf were a strange mix: survival guides, first aid manuals, children's books, novels. All of them showed signs of having been read multiple times. In the metal cabinet, he found more supplies: matches, candles, a flashlight that still worked, a first aid kit. And then, in a wooden box at the bottom of the cabinet, he found something that changed everything: a diary. It was a simple notebook with a blue cover, worn and water-stained, but still readable. On the first page, written in careful handwriting, was a name and a date: Clara Mendez, August 1987. Gabriel's hands trembled as he turned the pages. The diary was filled with entries, some long, some just a few sentences. As he began to read, his breath caught in his throat. August 14th, 1987, I found the shelter today. I don't know who built it or why, but it saved my life. I've been running for 3 days, and I couldn't go any farther. When I opened the door and saw the supplies inside, I cried so hard I thought I would never stop. August 16th, 1987, the people I ran from haven't found me. I don't think they're still looking. To them, I was just cheap labor. There are always more children they can buy from the orphanages. August 20th, 1987, I've been reading the books here. There's a survival guide that explains how the shelter works. Someone named Vicente built it in 1965. He built it as a refuge for anyone who needed to hide. I'm not the first person to use it. On the wall behind the cabinet, there are names carved into the stone. Children's names. Dates going back to 1966. August 25th, 1987, I carved my name on the wall today. Clara Mendez, 1987. I'm 12 years old. I was sold to a family who used me as a slave. I escaped. I survived. And someday, if I make it out of here alive, I'm going to help other kids who end up in places like this. September 3rd, 1987, I'm leaving the shelter today. I found a trail that leads to a town about 10 miles north. I'm scared, but I can't stay here forever. Before I go, I'm restocking the supplies with things I gathered from a forest. I'm leaving this diary in case another child finds this place and needs to know they're not alone. If you're reading this, you're going to survive. I promise. Clara. Gabriel finished reading and slowly closed the diary. His hands were shaking again, but this time not from cold or fear. He stood and moved to the wall behind the cabinet, pulling it away from a stone. There, carved into the rock with what must have been a nail or knife, were names and dates. Vicente Jr., 1966 Anna, 1971 Carlos, 1978 Maria, 1982 Clara, 1987. And spaces left blank, as if waiting for more names. Gabriel understood. This shelter had been built by someone who had lost a child to the same kind of exploitation he had just escaped. And for decades, that person, Vicente, had maintained it as a refuge for other lost children. Clara had found it, had survived, had left the diary to give hope to whoever came next. And now it was Gabriel's turn. He found a nail among the tools on the shelf and carefully carved his own name into the wall. Gabriel, 2024. As he stepped back to look at the names, something inside him shifted. He was not alone. He had never been alone. Other children had fought the same fight, had survived, had escaped. And somewhere out there, Clara was still alive. The diary said she wanted to help kids like him. Maybe she had. Maybe she was still helping. Gabriel returned to the cabinet and searched more carefully. Behind the first aid kit, he found another sealed plastic bag. Inside was a folded piece of paper, newer than the diary, the paper still white. He unfolded it carefully. It was a letter, handwritten in the same careful script as the diary, but the handwriting was older now, more confident. To whoever finds this shelter, my name is Clara Mendez. I'm 49 years old now. I found this place when I was 12, running from people who had bought me like property. Vicente built this shelter after his son disappeared into the child trafficking system in 1965. He spent the rest of his life maintaining it and creating a network of safe houses and contacts for children in danger. He died in 1995, but before he did, he taught me everything he knew. I became a lawyer. I specialized in child protection and trafficking cases. I've spent my entire adult life doing what Vicente did, building networks to save children who fall through the cracks. If you found this shelter, you're running from something terrible. I understand. I lived it. But you don't have to run forever. Below this letter, you'll find a phone number. It's a secure line monitored 24 hours a day by people I trust completely. They're part of Vicente's network. They'll help you. When you call, say this exact phrase: Vicente sent me. They'll ask you where you are. Tell them about the shelter. They'll come for you. You'll be safe. I promise. Clara Mendez, attorney at Law Fundación Vicente, Child Protection Network, updated. January 2024. Below the letter was a phone number. Gabriel stared at it for a long time. Part of him wanted to call immediately. But another part, the part that had learned not to trust adults, the part that had been sold and beaten and betrayed, was terrified. What if this was a trap? What if the number didn't work? What if the people on the other end were just like the Monteros? He spent that first night in the shelter reading and rereading Clara's diary and letter, studying every word, looking for any sign that this might be false. But everything about the shelter, about the supplies, about the care with which it had been maintained, told him that this was real. Someone had dedicated their life to saving children like him. And now he had to decide whether to trust that. Gabriel spent 3 days in the buried shelter before he found the courage to use the phone number. During those days, he existed in a strange state between safety and fear. The shelter protected him from the elements and from the Monteros, who he occasionally heard in the distance, still searching the mountains. But he was also trapped, unable to move forward, paralyzed by the decision he knew he had to make. He rationed the food carefully, eating only what he needed to stay alive. He read every book on the shelves, children's stories that reminded him of a childhood that felt like it belonged to someone else, survival guides that taught him things he hoped he'd never need to use. He studied Clara's diary until he had memorized entire passages. On the second night, he carved a longer message beneath his name on the wall. Gabriel, 2024, sold by the orphanage. Used as a slave. Escaped. Clara's words gave me hope. On the third day, he made his decision. He would call. He had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. Using the flashlight, he examined the phone number more carefully. It was a Sao Paulo area code. Below it, Clara had written instructions. There is a satellite phone in the metal cabinet, bottom drawer, sealed in waterproof plastic. Solar battery. Charge it in the light from the ventilation shaft for 6 hours before use. Gabriel found the phone exactly where Clara said it would be. It was an older model, bulky and heavy, but when he set it in the dim light coming from the ventilation shaft, the solar battery indicator began to glow. He waited the full 6 hours, his heart pounding with anticipation and terror. When the battery showed fully charged, he sat on the cot with the phone in his hands, staring at the keypad. This was it, the moment that would determine everything. He entered the number, his fingers shaking so badly he had to start over twice. Then he pressed the call button. The phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Gabriel's heart was beating so hard he could feel it in his throat. On the 4th ring, someone answered. Fundación Vicente, secure line. How can I help you? The voice was female, calm, professional, speaking Portuguese with a Sao Paulo accent. Gabriel opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Hello? Is anyone there? This is a safe line. You can speak freely. Gabriel forced the words out, his voice barely a whisper. Vicente sent me. There was a brief pause, then the woman's voice changed, became warmer, more urgent. Okay, I understand. You're safe now. Can you tell me your name? Gabriel. Gabriel, my name is Anna. I work with Clara. You found the shelter, didn't you? The one in the mountains. Yes. Gabriel, you're very brave. Can you tell me what happened? Why are you in the shelter? And then, for the first time since his parents died, Gabriel told his whole story to an adult who actually listened. He told Anna about the orphanage, about Director Morales selling him, about the Monteros and the beatings and the escape. He told her about finding the shelter, about Clara's diary, about the names on the wall. Anna listened to everything without interrupting. When he finished, there was a long silence. Then Anna spoke, and her voice was thick with emotion. "Gabriel, I need you to listen to me very carefully. You are not going back to those people, ever. Do you understand? We're going to come get you, and we're going to make sure you're safe." "How?" Gabriel asked. "The shelter is in the middle of nowhere. I don't even know exactly where I am. The shelter has GPS coordinates built into the satellite phone. I can see exactly where you are. We have people in that region. They can reach you by tomorrow morning." "What if the Monteros find me first?" "They won't. Gabriel, they're not looking for you anymore. They reported you as a runaway to local police 3 days ago, then went back to their property. They think you died of exposure in the mountains. To them, you're not worth the effort of searching anymore." Gabriel felt a strange mix of relief and horror. He had been so worthless to them that they couldn't even be bothered to keep looking. "Gabriel," Anna continued, "I need you to stay in the shelter until our team arrives. Don't open the door for anyone unless they give you a code phrase. The phrase is, 'Clara kept her promise.' Can you remember that?" "Clara kept her promise," Gabriel repeated. "Good. They'll arrive around 9 a.m. tomorrow. You'll be safe until then." "Yes." "Okay. I'm going to stay on the line with you for a few more minutes, and then I need to coordinate the rescue. But Gabriel, I want you to know something." "What?" "Clara is here. She's standing right next to me. She wants to talk to you." Gabriel's breath caught. There was a rustling sound as the phone was passed to someone else. Then a new voice, older, filled with emotion, spoke. "Gabriel, this is Clara." And Gabriel, who had held himself together through days of terror and pain and loneliness, finally broke. He began to cry. Not quiet tears. Deep, wrenching sobs that shook his entire body. "I found your diary," he managed to say between sobs. "I read it. You said I'd survive. You promised. And you did survive," Clara said gently. "You found the shelter. You were brave enough to call. Gabriel, you did everything right." "I was so scared," Gabriel whispered. "I know. I was scared too. But you're not alone anymore. Do you understand? You're part of Vicente's family now. We protect each other." Gabriel clutched the phone, crying so hard he could barely breathe. "Gabriel, listen to me," Clara continued. "Tomorrow morning, my team is going to bring you to Sao Paulo. You'll stay in one of our safe houses, a real safe house, where children who have been through what you've been through can heal. And when you're ready, we're going to find you a real family. People who will love you the way you deserve to be loved." "What about the Monteros?" Gabriel asked. Clara's voice turned hard. "Leave them to me. I've been investigating child trafficking networks for 25 years. I know exactly how to handle people like them. They're going to prison, Gabriel. I promise you that." There was another pause, and when Clara spoke again, her voice was soft. "Gabriel, I want to tell you something. When I carved my name on that wall in 1987, I felt like the loneliest person in the world. But Vicente's shelter saved my life, and it gave me a purpose. I've spent decades making sure that other children could find the same hope I found." "You've helped a lot of kids?" Gabriel asked. "Hundreds. And every single one of them is part of our family now. Some are adults now, working with the foundation. Some are still children, learning how to trust again. But all of them survived because someone believed they were worth saving." "Am I worth saving?" Gabriel asked in a small voice. "Gabriel," Clara said firmly, "you are worth everything. You are brave and strong and resilient, and I cannot wait to meet you in person." Gabriel talked with Clara for another 10 minutes before the call ended. She explained what would happen the next day, answered all his questions, and made him promise to stay in the shelter until the rescue team arrived. When the call finally ended, Gabriel sat in the dim light of the shelter, holding the silent phone. He looked around at the supplies that had kept him alive, at Clara's diary, at the names carved into the wall. This place had been built by a father who lost his son and decided that no other child should be lost the same way. It had sheltered children for nearly 60 years. And now it had sheltered him. Gabriel stood and walked to the wall one more time. Using the nail, he carefully carved one more line beneath his name. Gabriel, 2024, sold by the orphanage. Used as a slave. Escaped. Clara's words gave me hope. Clara kept her promise. Then he lay down on the cot, wrapped himself in one of Vicente's blankets, and for the first time in years, fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. The next morning, exactly at 9 a.m., Gabriel heard a knock on the metal door. Then a voice, calm, kind, called out, "Gabriel, my name is Ricardo. I'm here with Clara's team." Clara kept her promise. Gabriel opened the door. Standing outside in the morning sunlight were 3 people, 2 men and a woman, all wearing vests that identified them as social workers from Fundacao Vicente. Ricardo, a man in his 40s with kind eyes, crouched down to Gabriel's level. "It's good to meet you, Gabriel. Are you ready to go home?" Gabriel looked back one last time at the shelter that had saved his life, at the names on the wall, at the supplies carefully maintained by people who understood what it meant to be lost. Then he turned back to Ricardo and nodded. "I'm ready." They drove for hours, descending from the mountains into lower elevations, then finally into the sprawling urban landscape of Sao Paulo. Gabriel watched the city grow around him, buildings rising higher, streets filling with people, the noise and energy of millions of lives happening simultaneously. The safe house was nothing like he expected. It was a large, warm building in a residential neighborhood, with a garden in front and the sound of children's laughter coming from inside. Clara was waiting on the front steps. She was a tall woman in her late 40s, with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a ponytail and eyes that were both fierce and infinitely kind. When Gabriel stepped out of the car, she walked toward him slowly, giving him space to adjust. "Hi, Gabriel," she said. "I'm Clara." Gabriel looked at her, at the woman who had carved her name on a wall 37 years ago, who had survived the same nightmare he had just escaped, who had dedicated her life to making sure no child had to face it alone. "Thank you," he whispered. Clara smiled. "No, Gabriel. Thank you. For being brave enough to survive. For trusting the shelter. For calling us. You're part of something much bigger now." She gestured toward the house. "There are 12 other children inside. All of them came from situations like yours. All of them found their way to us. Some have been here for months, some for years. They're going to be your family while you heal." Gabriel looked at the house, at the warm lights in the windows, at the children's drawings taped to the glass. "And after I heal?" he asked. Clara knelt down so she was at eye level with him. "After you heal, we find you a permanent family. People who will adopt you properly, legally, and love you completely. And if you want, when you're older, you can join us in the work we do, helping other kids find their way out of the darkness." Gabriel thought about Vicente, who had built a shelter for lost children after losing his own son. He thought about Clara, who had turned her trauma into a lifetime of rescue work. He thought about all the names on the wall, all the children who had survived because someone believed they deserved to be saved. "I want to help," he said. Clara smiled. "I know you do. But first, let's get you inside. Let's get you safe. Let's let you be a child again." She extended her hand. Gabriel took it. And together, they walked into the house where the sound of children's laughter promised that healing was possible, that family could be chosen, and that even the darkest stories could have hopeful endings. The Monteros were arrested 6 weeks later. Clara's investigation uncovered not just their enslavement of Gabriel, but connections to a larger trafficking network that had been operating for years. Director Morales was arrested on the same day. Gabriel testified in court, his voice steady and clear, telling the truth about what had been done to him and to countless other children. The Monteros were sentenced to 15 years in prison. Director Morales received 20. The São Rafael orphanage was shut down permanently, and every child there was transferred to legitimate care facilities monitored by Fundacao Vicente. Gabriel was adopted 1 year later by a couple who had lost their daughter to illness and had been carefully vetted by Clara's team. They were patient, loving, and committed to helping Gabriel heal at his own pace. On the day of the adoption, Clara gave Gabriel a gift. It was a new diary, blue cover, just like the one she had left in the shelter. "Someday," she said, "you might want to write your own story. Leave your own message for whoever comes next." Gabriel opened the diary. On the first page, Clara had written, "For Gabriel, who found hope in darkness and became part of Vicente's legacy." 10 years later, Gabriel returned to the mountains. He was 19 years old, studying social work at university and volunteering with Fundación Vicente during his breaks. He hiked to the shelter with Clara, Ricardo, and 3 other survivors who had found the refuge over the years. Together, they restored the supplies, updated the satellite phone, and added solar panels to the ventilation shafts to ensure the charging system would never fail. And Gabriel carved one final message on the wall, below all the names. This shelter was built with love by people who understood suffering. It has saved lives for 60 years. If you found it, you are meant to survive. Call the number. Trust Clara. You are not alone. You never were.